Professor Amadi Ihunwo is the head of School of Anatomical Sciences of the Wit University, Johannesburg, South Africa. He is a professor of anatomy and a neuroscientist. His research area is comparative adult neurogenesis and glial looking at the generation of new cells in the adult brain in mammalian and avian species. He completed the prestigious Switzerland South Africa Joint Research Program as principal investigator from the year 2009 to 2014. He is a C-rated researcher with the South African National Research Foundation. He has supervised several MSc and PhD candidates to completion and with several publications in South African development of higher education and training accredited journals. He is also a recipient of the Faculty Service Excellence and Research Award at the Wits University. Professor Ihunwo holds a PhD degree in anatomy from Mbarara University of Science and Technology, Uganda, with research conducted at the Flint Institute of Brain Research, University of Leipzig in Germany. Professor Ihunwo's working experience spans across different regions in Africa. In Nigeria, he has spent 11 years, both in Johnny Jones and Bayero University, Kano. In Uganda, 8 years at Mbarara University of Science and Technology, and in South Africa, 16 years, and in constant interaction with colleagues in Central and North America. Professor Ihunwo is a recipient of the Distinguished Alumnus of University of Port Harcourt, Nigeria. Professor Ihunwo is the immediate past Secretary General, CEO of the Society of Neurosciences of Africa, SONA, from the year 2017 to the year 2021, and currently the Chair, SONA Governing Council, 2022 to 2023. SONA is a non-profit organization and functions as the umbrella organization for the regional and national neuroscience societies and groups in Africa, and a member society of the International Brain Research Organization, IBRO. SONA promotes research, teaching, and advocacy in neuroscience in Africa. Professor Ihunwo is also a counselor representing the Africa on the Council of the International Society of Neurochemistry from the year 2021 to 2025. Here I present to you Professor Amadi Ihunwo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anna. Before I will start my lecture, I would just like to request that a video be played. Then after the video, I will give my talk.
Welcome back to Black News Tonight. A new initiative is advocating for African-centered and African-controlled neuroscience research in an effort to advance brain research on the continent and beyond. Understanding how the human brain functions remains one of the greatest challenges facing scientists, but a lot of brain research involves a small and well-funded group of labs without much connection with the African continent. But now, former U.S. Representative for Pennsylvania's 2nd Congressional District, Shaka Fattah, and founder of the African Brain Wellness Initiative, Dr. Amadi Ihunwo, are teaming up to bridge the gap in neuroscience in the hope of improving brain wellness globally. Mr. Fattah and Dr. Ihunwo, thank you both for joining me on the show. Congressman, I'm going to start with you. What led to Fattah Global partnering with the Brain Wellness Initiative, and what does this agreement, this partnership, signal?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be with you and to talk to, I think, the most important audience anywhere to be found this evening, and that is to our community about the importance of addressing this challenge. It's a real, we have almost 1.5 billion people in the world with a neurological disorder or disease. We have hundreds of diseases like Alzheimer's, epilepsy, autism, you have mental health challenges, schizophrenia, depression. Go through the laundry list. They have something in common. We don't have any cures. We don't have any effective treatments. And in neuroscience, and I led the U.S. effort, which is a multi-billion-dollar effort, still ongoing, and the Europeans have a major effort, the Chinese. But I said last year that I felt that it was important that we focus on African neuroscience. And it's a simple point. The modern human brain emerged in Africa. The environment that trained and informed the modern human brain is in Africa. And we have to think about finding some answers that have eluded us by uplifting African neuroscience and neuroscientists. And so I spoke to the Society of Neurosciences in Africa. Dr. Amadi offered me the opportunity to address them on this subject. And I said that we needed to create a fund that could allow African directed research to start to analyze some of the challenges and to think anew about issues that really have eluded us for a very, very long time with no real hope in front of us. So we're taking a new approach. This is a 5-year partnership that we have inked today between Fatah Neuroscience, which is my company, and the Brain Wellness Initiative, which is a legacy of Dr. Amadi and his great leadership, and you're going to hear from him. But there is clearly, he's one of the leading neuroscientists anywhere in the world, not just in Africa, but anywhere in the world. And he's agreed to help move this effort forward. And we intend 5 years from now to be talking about the results of this work. And all along the way, we think there's going to be amazing results from this collaboration.
I like how that sounds.
Well, it has to happen. You know,
5 years, results, collaboration. Yeah, all of it sounds great. Dr. Amadi, let me bring you in. Late last year, we saw South African scientists make an early detection of the COVID-19 variant Omicron, and it allowed the world to get a head start on combating this highly contagious emerging strain. How can the situation be applied in having African inclusion when it comes to other things? You know, the scientific community's quest to advance brain research, for example, or any other medical challenges we have. How can we bring in the best intellectual and scientific resources from the continent of Africa?
Thanks, Mark. I think the Omicron was a good example to redirect attention to Africa. And for us, we are coming in on the neuroscience front. The beauty is that it is possible that within the continent, we can drive a brain-related research on the continent. We don't have to always wait until we move to the north, but rather we can do it right there on the continent. I mean, Mark, just imagine a continent of 55 countries. I mean, with a 5-year project, that is just a beginning of what is there and available to be used and bring onto the global platform. I always talk about the neuro data on the African continent and the resources, the flora and fauna that we have, that if you can pick that data and bring it to the global platform, then you have a base for so many activities that can change the narrative. You know, we have data that has not been engaged, and we are coming in from the brain science environment, which of course I've been privileged to oversee on the continent for the past 4 years.
Mr. Fatah, what sparked your interest in getting involved in African neuroscience? You a West Philly guy, you from my way, you know, plenty of issues domestically that you've been engaged in. What brought you to Africa? What brought you to this issue?
Well, you know, in my home church at Mount Carmel, we had a Dr. Norton who PhD at University of Chicago, did a lot of work on trauma related to our young people in an urban environment. Her research was fascinating. It showed that there was literally a physical change in the brain when you had sustained trauma and stress upon young people's lives. But that when they were returned to a safety and a safe environment, their brain returned to normal. This was fascinating to me. You and I know of my work, and you were involved with it, on getting young people to pursue terminal degrees in the hard sciences. I've always had an interest in cognition, but when I learned that the focus needed to be in those first 1,000 days, pediatric brain development, and how you got these 100 billion neurons in the human brain making connections, 700 connections every second, and that the brain is architectural and you got to stimulate it early. This taught me a lot. The Speaker of the House had me pull together some people who were chairs and subcommittee chairs when I was in the Congress to look at cognition, not just disease and disorders, but how we can improve in teaching and learning. That got my interest. But when I got the science portfolio, I decided to make neuroscience my #1 priority and to get our government moving in that direction. And with President Obama, we launched the Brain Initiative, $2 billion in the pipeline today, 1,000 research projects. We got another $4 billion in the pipeline. But I'm telling you now that I think that we have to be broader. When I was leaving the Congress, I was pushing for international collaboration. And now I'm really focused on that part of this. And I'm focused on Africa as the premier place where we have yet to even begin to make the resources available to scientists there. Not to have them do what we want them to do, but to have scientists do what scientists do best, which is have a theory, have a hypothesis, apply it, perturb the theory, see if it works, and to work from failure to success. And the world needs to find success on the neurological front. As you said at the beginning of this interview, it's the greatest area of mystery that still exists today. And the best scientists in the world, the Nobel Prize winners, will tell you neuroscience is a field where it is still more one of ignorance, not in a derogatory way, but we lack knowledge. We lack knowledge about.
It makes sense. We have a lot of ground to cover. We got a lot of space to explore. We got a lot to figure out with neuroscience. And too often we've left that to the Europeans. We've left that to white people. But to say, look, Africa has something to contribute here. We have the richest minds, the most fertile resources. We have every opportunity to do this. And it will help African people. It'll help black people around the world. But it'll make the entire globe, irrespective of race, class, gender, or geography, better when Africa's involved in a full partner in all of this. Congressman Fattah, Dr. Amadi, I want to thank you both for joining me on Black News tonight.
Okay, thank you. I would like to share my slide. Can I get a confirmation? Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can see your slide.
All right. First of all, I would like to start with acknowledgements, and I would like to start with the Vice Chancellor, Professor Aluyo, for this opportunity for me to speak on your university's platform. So I stand on the existing protocol of the Vice Chancellor and the principal officers down to the provost, the dean, the visiting deans I see on this discussion, the HOD, and down to the anatomy department. Dr. Memudu and your team, thank you. And again, like I said, it's an honor that I've been asked to be a mentor to the Neuroscience Research Group in Anatomy Department of Edo State University. So I wanted to share with us, and for the very first time, some of the things that the Brain Wellness Initiative will be doing. But before I do that, the simple thing I would like to share with us in this Brain Awareness Week is just to answer some simple questions that has to do with the brain. The first thing is, what is neuroscience? And neuroscience, as we know, is the study of the nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, the network of sensory nerve neurons throughout the whole body. And the neuroscience remains a fascinating field of exciting study and research, as most of the workings of the brain, as you've heard, are still unknown. We still have a lot to expose. We still have a lot to discover with respect to the complexity in the functions of the brain. Now, the next question is, what do neuroscientists do? from the academic point, the neuroscientists will describe the brain. It could be an invertebrate, it could be a vertebrate brain, it could be a human brain, and how it functions. Now, the emphasis here, its normal function. Then we look at how the nervous system develops, matures, and maintains itself throughout life. Then the third part is to find ways to prevent or cure many devastating neurological and psychiatric disorders. And these three aspects of what the neuroscientists do is adapted from the Society for Neuroscience. Then the first thing we'll think, well, how do we engage research in neuroscience? And I have highlighted on this slide different aspects. Number one, normal thing we will say, what is the knowledge and attitude and practices? I mean, how do people see when we say the brain, when we say neuroscience, when we see a mentally challenged individual, when we talk of mental health and psychology? So that on its own is a research approach to try to understand how the brain works. Then on the second point, number two, will be from the hospitals, from the clinical setting, we think of case reports of brain disorders or brain neurological challenges that are visible in the hospital and even outside the hospital settings. So we see different brain disorders from different regions, and then we go to the imaging tools in terms of diagnosis. I mean, the level of neuroimaging that we have now that helps to try to zero in on which part of the brain is likely affected that is producing the symptoms that we see in a patient that we classify then as a mentally challenged or in the domain of mental illness. Then, of course, the research in the laboratories, and the research in the laboratories could either be on the in vivo side, you're looking at an animal, you're looking at the cells that are proliferating in the brain and how they differentiate and where they go to and where they mature, then become integrated to the cells there to provide the function that we expect from that region. Then outside individually, you go into the in vitro aspect. We try to look at the culturing, you take out cells and culture, isolate them and characterize and allow them to expand and differentiate again and see what is going to produce. So these are different aspects that one could use to approach the study of the brain. Now, within this context, and as time goes on, we find that we are now seeing different fields of neuroscience. I mean, personally, as an anatomist and coming into neuroscience research, the part of anatomy that initiates one into neuroscience is neuroanatomy. And you look at the structure, organization of the nervous system, what we see when we look at the gross aspect of the brain, and when we section the brains, and when we stain and look at the microscope to look at sites that produce neurotransmitters and synapses, and we characterize them to a function. You can think of developmental neuroscience that looks at how the brain grows, I mean, from the fetal stage until postnatal time and the postnatal development. And there are changes that do take place as we go through this process. Changes in the neurotransmitter process, changes in the connections, and then which are maintained as the individual goes into adulthood. Then cognitive neuroscience, now you're speaking to the functions of the brain to different areas. I mean, my research area, again, falls around the limbic system, which speaks to cognitive behavioral aspects of the brain. And now you look at the techniques that are associated with that. And of course, from the imaging side, equipment like the MRI, the PET scans are used to see in the human brain sites where we have problem. It could be with language or it could be associated with other functions of the brain. Then we have behavioral neuroscience and neurophysiology, looking at underlying behavior, even the emotional aspects of behavior, looking at stimulations that will produce electrical activities that could be interpreted and matched with brain scans
and now be able to speak to what activities are going on actively or passively in the brain at any particular time. Then the clinical neuroscience brings in our colleagues, the psychiatrists, the neurologists, the neurosurgeons, and other medical specialties, using and building on the basic research findings and developing diagnostic methods and ways to prevent and treat neurological disorders that affect millions of people globally. Then our neuropharmacology colleagues, actions of the drugs on the brain, drug and substance abuse, and their mechanism actions that we see. Neuroinformatics adopts the approach of bringing in the computers into neuroscience. You design models, you design how connections could take place in the brain, and the complexity of even the computers, we can match and try to compare with the complexity of how the brain works. Then neuroethics, as more of these activities are going on, we need to be conscious of what are the ethical limitations that we have and to which point can we go in subjecting humans, especially to different research activities. Now, with all of this, there's a need for us to consolidate the neuro data. Personally, my interest remains neuro data from the African continent. So in whichever field of neuroscience, we need to build the development, storage, and even access of empirical data on the behavioral aspect, on structural aspect, and even the translational neuroscience, what the diagnosis and the treatment patterns that are taking place in different parts of the continent. If one is to look at laboratory, I mean, for one who is interested in laboratory-related, behavioral neuroscience and testing, stereotaxic instruments, surgical microscope, microtomes, maze, radial maze, locomotor activity. These are research tools that are very necessary to have in a laboratory setting. You go into psychopharmacology, the rotor rod, treadmill, condition, place, preference, apparatus, locomotor activity chamber, operant chambers, these are needed in the laboratory setting. Developmental neurobiology, micromanipulators, pressure injection system, inverted microscope for time-lapse analysis, imaging and neurohistology, we need that to be in a laboratory environment. Computational, we've already mentioned in terms of computers and how to model activities of the brain. If we refer to the imaging tools, these will be very necessary. I mean, what you have here is like an MRI, showing the sites when you have finger movement. I mean, this section speaks to the motor cortex and the cerebral cortex. This section speaks, the level lower speaks to the cerebellum, which deals with the fine movement of the fingers. So with this kind of information, you could follow the activities that are taking place at a part of the brain at any point in time. So we have to have access to MRI machines, we have to have access to microscopes, we have to have access to what I refer to as neurosonography, EEGs around us to be able to engage research activities and even diagnosis for brain-related disorders. And this will require a multidisciplinary approach. I mean, it will not just be one department, it's a collective for this equipment to be available, and the sharing of instrumentation will be very, very critical. Now, of recent, we're having more neuro constituencies. So this gives us an idea how widespread neuroscience is with our daily lives. We have neurodiplomacy, we have neurolinguistics, and I personally always ask the question, what is the name of the brain in your language? We need to answer that question. Anywhere there's a language, we should be able to say, this is the name of the brain. In my language, Ikore language is Oburu, which speaks to the brain, and Oburu speaks to the fact that it is located in the head. We need to speak to neuroeducation. People need to know how the brain works. Neurotechnology, yes, in this technological aid, we need to engage the technologies we have and how to use them. And neuro law, I mean, to what limit? I'll give an example. For example, there are places where attempted suicide is considered as a criminal offense, but rather that should be considered as a mental health issue. And some countries are looking at it. I'm aware that a country like Kenya is trying to change that law and make it a mental health issue. Take the person to a hospital or facility rather than taking the person to the police station and lock up such a person in the place. So neuro law is coming in, and we need to understand that the neurosciences is crossing every part of our life. Now, the challenge has always been, how do we source for funds? And my interest goes into brain research funding, primarily because of my activities overseeing the Neuroscience Society, being part of global neuroscience activities. And I just want to remind us, these are different areas. It could be institutional, it could be public, and in our setting, and we must recognize the governmental levels, local government, state, federal, central government in some countries, and provincial government in some countries. So there must be that level of funding from these arms of government. Then the industry, the private sector, then the charities. It could be a local charity, it could be an international charity, it could be a foundation, it could be endowment. We need to recognize that these are avenues that we can source funding for brain research. We've interacted with international academic societies. The International Brain Research Organization has been so wonderful on the African continent. The International Study for Neurochemistry, they've also been wonderful on the African continent, providing funds. But we need to expand our base of looking at funding for brain research on the African continent. Again, when you look at avenues from advocacy, when you make public, like in such a week of brain awareness globally, what you find is that sometimes we have wealthy relations of patients with neurological or mental health challenges. And subsequently, they decide to say, I am going to commit dedicated funds for a research in an area. And that is the global approach. Or it could be from a public outreach like we're doing this week all over the globe, highlighting the need for funding to be dedicated to brain-related research. We know that there are places globally where there are challenges and opposition to the level of use of animals. But again, we need to explain that and make provision animals that could be used for brain-related research. Now, for somebody considering neuroscience, you want to build a career around that, time is always of essence. And promoting strategies, you must work that out. Identify laboratories, identify institutions where you have neuroscience activities as a research area or discussion point, and start to identify with such areas. You need to develop your own profile. I mean, in this day and age of internet, you cannot afford not to have an online presence, speaking to your research and asking questions and looking at what others are doing. Then again, we can't shy away from the networking media. These are the situation we find ourselves in, and we need to maximize that different people are there, maintain your connections there, speak about the brain, speak about your interest in the brain. Somebody will get across to you and declare interest in the part of the brain that you're interested in. And one needs to develop essential survival skills in the area of neuroscience. Now, coming to the Brain Wellness Initiative, just as you've heard in that, the Brain Wellness Initiative is a foundation that I have set up as a legacy project. From my experiences, I see we need to come to a point where we need to provide avenues where we can source the funds, where we can make available funding on the African continent for our colleagues to be able to at least stay on the continent and conduct different aspects of brain-related research. So this is a legacy project that I have put in place, registered in Nigeria, and we are going ahead. I mean, having identified a strategic partner that you've seen in that video. Now, again, before coming to this point, we've had to review some things and ask ourselves the question, how do we, succeed in funding research, especially neuroscience research? And I like to draw from William McKnight's philanthropic goal. And it says a well-financed brain research organization to study the functions of the brain, the most important organ in the human body and the least known organ, could become a great gift to humanity. So when we engage in the neurosciences, we are coming to a domain where we really want to give a gift to humanity. And a strategy of pulling together resources and expertise from the university. Within the university, there are different departments that will be involved within the state, within a country, within our continent, Africa. And when we do that, we'll overcome problems associated with establishing vibrant neuroscience research all over the place. And the recipe speaks to identifying excellence, finding your niche. Neuroscience is very broad, and there are still places that we need to fit in and plug in. Recognize timely opportunities. Our young colleagues need to understand there's a step-by-step progression as you engage in neuroscience. Follow through, be consistent, commit to a line of brain-related research. Don't attach a limitation or strings to you, but I will speak to strings in a short while when it comes to how the Brain Awareness Initiative will be engaging people on the African continent. We need to mix up engagement with non-neuroscientists alike. And that is what the Brain Awareness Week is coming to. Just speak about the brain openly. It doesn't have to be only scientists. We speak about it in the community and let them know. Think broadly over and above your research area. Expect the unexpected sometimes. Create a community of peers. The team is better than individuals. I like the fact that you have the Neuroscience Research Group in the Department of Anatomy in Edo State University. And we want to see more of that in our universities, in our settings. Of course, we need to practice transparency, balance, and meritocracy. And that is what people use to assess, the kind of governance structure you're putting in place. Now, for neuroscientists worldwide, discoveries are very important, and that is what advances the science and improves the health of millions of people. There is continued progress which will rely on public funding, whether you're in the basic side, in the translational phase, or in the clinical side of neuroscience. And we need to make connection between scientific discovery and funding. It is vital for scientists, neuroscientists, to communicate effectively and frequently with the public and policymakers. This is where the money lies. And for us, that is the power of advocacy in all we do. My personal experience starting from Nigeria, being at University of Jos and Bayer University, moving to Uganda and moving to South Africa, then interacting with colleagues from the Central and North Africa, and being part of the Society of Neuroscience of Africa, one of the things we identify is the challenge to research funding and the research funding that is dedicated to brain research. And so I looked at the African Union, and there's a African Union Agenda 2063, a call to action 72C. At the 24th ordinary session of the Assembly of the Union in January 2015 at Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And it says, I quote, catalyze education and skills revolution and actively promote science, technology, research, and innovation to build knowledge. So we need to build knowledge around the brain. Human capital, we need to build human capital, capabilities, and skills, which will now drive the innovations for the African century. And so there is the move towards Global Brain Initiative. And this map you see here, you find that actually in the Global South, not much activity in terms of brain initiatives that has a global presence that we need to drive this activity on the continent. So not too long ago, 2013 is when the US set up the US Brain Initiative. And like you heard in the video, Congressman Chaka happens to be in the center of that drive. And so there is a US Brain Initiative, Brain Research through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies Initiative. About the same time, the European Union started the Human Brain Project. Japan went on to start the MINDS, Mapping by Innovative Neurotechnologies for Disease Studies. South Korea, Brain Mapping Project. So we have activities around that. And I thought this is the time for us to start making our presence known globally in the area of brain initiatives. And that's thinking beyond just formal degree granting programs. We are used to funds in the university to train, but again, we need to look beyond the university and reach out to the community and deal with mental health. And all of this will need some element of funding. And why do we collaborate? For BMI, these are the 4 things we need to achieve: boost expertise, create role models on the continent, provide training opportunities, and provide funding opportunities. And what we need to achieve through the BMI is we want to help and attract co-funding, establish sharing of capacity and strengthening of capacity, provide eyes and ears and identify national and regional needs, enable global challenges to be addressed more effectively around the brain sciences, enhance innovation, encourage ownership and cooperation, stimulate new ways of communicating, and help match solutions. And this is drawn from the Commonwealth Science Council. And with that, I went into this partnership, my foundation, the Brain Wellness Initiative, with Shaka Fatai, like you've heard in the video. And the emphasis here, I must say, is that this is an African-centered, African-controlled, and African-directed neuroscience research. That is critical for the Brain Wellness Initiative. So our focus remains the continent of Africa. And we signed on this 5-year partnership to start off this. And interestingly, we got the African-American Chamber of Commerce of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware to become interested, because we believe that it's not just those of us in the university, we need the outside community to be part of this legacy project. So what does Brain Wellness Initiative plan to achieve? Our goals will be to create a multi-generational neuroscience teaching, learning, research, and advocacy on brain wellness in Africa. We want to engage policymakers, stakeholders to know about brain health and wellness via global initiatives. The better they know, the more they are able to support it. And then provide or facilitate grants to organizations, institutions, individuals in science, education, culture, because the neuro constituencies are listed. It's needed to receive some funding in one way or the other. So, having done that, these are the pillars the Brain Wellness Initiative will pursue. Continue medical education and capacity building for African brain health practitioners. As we build an African neurodata repository, we still want to expose our colleagues with continued medical education to what happens in other centers. I will add here that we will be very particular in terms of those who are on the African continent, because I personally believe that whatever training you receive has a place on the African continent. So across the 5 regions of Africa, North, Central, East, West, and Southern Africa, we need to build capacity. So part of the funding adventure will be to provide that, establish contacts, establish timelines for people to have that exposure and come back to the continent and make your contribution. We need to teach our community, the African continent, we need to have good knowledge of the brain and how it works, the normal functioning of the brain and brain in a disease state. That we need to do, not just in English language, but in other languages on the African continent. So we need to drive for that, to have our people understand those languages in countries, in regions, using the language component. And C, neuroscience research funding. We've identified 3 categories of people: PhD fellows who we will support to facilitate completion of their project, either via a research visit, and knowing that on the African continent, we have very limited places where we have postdoctoral programs. We intend to fund what we consider as early researchers, which will be in the postdoc category. Then we intend to fund established researchers where we can identify a setting, and by providing a little support in terms of an equipment or providing a little support in terms of funding, they can train colleagues who are interested in those areas of research that is available at those centers. And then what we consider the Brain Wellness Initiative Neuro Hub. This will be centers of excellence. And these centers of excellence first will be diagnostic centers with neuroimaging facilities, EEGs, neurosonography, and chromatography. The essence of the chromatography in that environment, we've identified that the African flora, we have a lot of our colleagues doing research and looking at plant extracts. We want to take that level of research higher and make sure that those facilities will help in diagnosis. Then they must be used for research activities. So these 4 pillars is driving what the Brain Wellness Initiative is going to do. And we intend to make sure that at least by the end of this initial 5 years rollout, there'll be brain wellness across all spheres of life. And we will have partners, not just in the global north, we're also looking at global south and looking at our continent, that we can have people to partner with the Brain Wellness Initiative as we drive the research agenda in neuroscience on the African continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. That was a very good one. So we are going to take questions and answers. While we are taking questions and answers, before that, I'll do a brief recap of some of the highlights of this Amadi's presentation. Prof started by telling us what is neuroscience, and career path in neuroscience. He mentioned things like neuro-linguistic, neuro-law, neuro-diplomacy, neurotechnology. One interesting part of it was the neuro-linguistic, where Prof told us that we have to know the name of the brain in our own languages. So I think that's an assignment that we all take home from this event. You have to go back and know what the brain is called in your own language. If you're an Edoma, what is the brain called in your own language? So Prof, you mentioned something also on collaboration and networking through the Brain Awareness Initiative. One point also that I want to emphasize was attracting funding. You gave us 4 breakdowns of how we can partner and network through the Brain Awareness Initiative. One was on continual medical research and capacity building for Africa brain health practitioner. 2, you mentioned knowledge of the brain function and mental health. This has to do with civil and community awareness program. You mentioned research funding, new research funding for young PhD fellows, early researcher, postdoc, and established researcher. And the next one was on building a brain awareness neuro hub that would have to do with facilities. So this was some of the highlights from this discussion. As an institution and as a neuroscience group in the department, we want to also appreciate you, Prof, for accepting to be our mentor. I think from this partnership, the first one I said, attracting research fund, PhD fellows, and all that, we want to believe that with time, our department and our research group can also partner with you to attract some of these things down to our school.